Thank you. Thank you all. It's wonderful to be here today. I appreciate the invitation. I appreciate you all listening to me, and I would, in the interest of full disclosure, I would like to say that I am here with many friends and colleagues, Gulor Sabanci, Nihat Burker, Fatih Birol. Doan is a dear friend of mine as well. He now has the harried look of a conference organizer. He didn't look like that when he was a student at MIT. We were working together then. I'm honored to know these outstanding individuals, and I am here in no small measure to underscore my friendship and my belief with them, and my belief that that friendship and friendship between nations is started, strengthened, and maintained by personal connections, and there are shared values and interests. I also accepted to come speak here some time ago, and since I accepted, Russia has invaded Crimea, and we're having a lot of problems in Iraq. I would like to express my concern and support for the Turkish hostages in Iraq, and I note that Vice President Biden told Prime Minister Erdogan yesterday that the U.S. is prepared to support Turkey's efforts to bring about the safe return of its citizens and will stay in close touch with Turkey and Iraqi governments regarding resolution of this security situation. So our thoughts and prayers are with those folks in Iraq. Thank you. As many of you know, the leaders of the G7 met in Brussels last week. Energy security was high on their list. There are obvious reasons for that, and you can see here quotes from the communique that they put out in Brussels. Number one is that use of energy supplies as a means of coercion or a threat is unacceptable. That the crisis in the Ukraine puts energy security at the center of our collective agenda. And when they said collective agenda, they certainly meant the G7, but there are many, many other words in that communique and in the communique of the energy ministers who met in Rome earlier. I was there. That collective is broadened to include and will be broadened to include our allies and partners in other parts of the world. This is not only about the G7. They would ask IEA, Fatih's got a lot of work to do, by the end of 2014 for options for individual and collective actions of the G7 in natural gas security. And finally, we will promote an integrated LNG market and a natural gas market, including new supplies, development of transport, and promotion of flexible markets. 2 points on this next slide. This is gas supplied by Russia. Some countries, many of them neighbors of Turkey, get 100% of their natural gas from Russia. And Turkey's right in there at 59%. That's not a comfortable place to be, although Turkey has multiple sources of Russian gas. Some of these countries get their Russian gas only through Ukraine, and so they are facing an extremely uncertain winter if the Russians cut off supplies. I do note that there were some tanks rolling across Ukraine earlier today, Russian tanks, so it is still a very tenuous situation. And when the Russians shut off supplies to Ukraine in 2009, Europe responded. It responded incredibly quickly and creatively. It increased the use of storage. It reversed flows or increased flows on pipelines. There was a lot of fuel switching that occurred, and it increased imports of LNG, and it increased production where it could. I think that was primarily in Croatia. This slide, these are the core principles. I mentioned that we were in Rome. The energy ministers of the G7 met in Rome, and they developed core energy security principles that are not what we typically think of as energy security. That has been oil security in the past. That's been a long-held definition for 40 years. The G7 energy ministers thought we needed a much broader definition. First, they supported flexible, transparent markets, said they should be developed. I cannot read what I wrote. Developed, and this is, I have some shorthand words here that I'm going to use throughout this presentation. Those flexible, transparent markets, critical to market development and competitiveness. You see those red boxes there. Energy fuels, sources, and routes should be diversified, and indigenous energy should be, development should be encouraged. That's a diversification and important for energy equity. I'm going to say a few words about that in a minute. Infrastructure should be modernized, and that will improve system resilience. That has security implications as well. Reducing greenhouse gas emissions and accelerating the transition to a low-carbon economy are contributors to energy security. That's climate change. I would also say that climate change is a threat multiplier. I won't go into that in this discussion, but it is certainly a threat to certain regions around the world. Energy efficiency, the previous speaker addressed this as well. That should be enhanced. That's important to both competitiveness and climate change. And then finally, deployment of clean and sustainable energy technologies and continued investment in research and innovation should be promoted. That's important. Innovation, it's important for climate change, and that innovation is also important for competitiveness. This is first about near-term security. We're very concerned going into the winter. The G7 leaders directed us to put together contingency plans for the winter of 2014 for Ukraine and the region most vulnerable to potential shutoffs. And what this is here is in select countries, the volume of natural gas used in power generation and potential natural gas saved from fuel switching, and that's by country. And what you see there, that's Turkey. Turkey has a lot of fuel switching, but as a percentage, not so much. But you look at Romania there, the second red circle. Romania has a potential to fuel switch about 85% of its natural gas for either coal or oil. I don't know what the fuel switching other fuel is there. You see the same thing for Ukraine, enormous capacity to fuel switch, and Bulgaria as well. And these 13 countries that you see on this bar theoretically could fuel switch for about 0.9 trillion cubic feet. That's almost 5% of OECD Europe's consumption in 2012. So as a near-term energy security option, we need to be looking very closely at the capacity for fuel switching in the near term. I would also note that coal and oil will be the generation that you can fuel switch to that is easily stored, unlike natural gas. So it is an interesting option, and it was used extensively in 2009. Say a little bit about market development, and this was alluded to by the earlier speaker as well. The shutdown of nuclear reactors post-Fukushima has increased the demand for fossil fuels worldwide. Up here, what you see in the upper left-hand bar, you see prices tracking crude oil. Brent is at the top at $16.87. Asian gas $14.80. European spot $10.59. And then Henry Hub down there at $3.61. We have gas-on-gas competition, and we have continued disconnection of our natural gas prices from oil prices. And the net effect of that, that's also supposed to carry through till 2030. You can see the forecast numbers there as well. If we continue to have 3 regional natural gas markets, where prices in 2 of those regions are directly tied to oil. And because of this large price spread, LNG cargoes are moving to Asia, and that means that utilization of LNG regas facilities are very low right now, because your LNG is losing out to Asian markets. I spoke in Bulgaria a couple years ago. Capacity factors for LNG regas in Europe was 43%. It's down to about 20% now. That is the giant sucking sound of LNG going to Asia, certainly in a post-Fukushima environment. And one thing I would also say, U.S. has had an impact on LNG markets already, although it is not exporting any natural gas yet, because we were going to be importing a whole lot of natural gas in the United States, and that didn't happen. And so all those cargoes that were destined to come into into markets into the U.S. fundamentally were backed out to Europe. So it has had an impact already. We hope to have an impact on the future. And that's what this is about. This is the potential of U.S. natural gas exports to global LNG supplies. You can see here the U.S. volumes compared to Qatari volumes. Now, these are volumes. We are in the process of approving LNG export applications in the United States. The 9.27 BCF a day that you see there, that is the amount that we have given conditional or final approvals to in the United States. But those conditional approvals then have to go through FERC for a NEPA review and then back to the Department of Energy for a final determination. So they have not yet moved out into the marketplace. Were they all to be approved, we're right up on par with the largest LNG producer in the world, Qatar. And so we are looking to move into LNG exports in a big way. That is not without its controversy at home, and for both the environmentalists are concerned about that, and the manufacturers in the U.S. who are benefiting from cheap natural gas are not particularly thrilled about exporting a lot of gas. This is just a little bit about an international market. This is what would happen to the U.S. in 2030 if we modeled at MIT getting rid of the 3 regional markets we have in natural gas, assuming there was a global oil market, a global gas market like there is an oil market. And the graph on the left are the regional markets stay in effect in 2030. On the right, you have global markets. And these are numbers for the United States. This is what happens to price in the United States. The top is without a carbon price. The bottom number is with a carbon price. That bar is 2030. Okay, so you can see it's $7.5 an MCF in the U.S. With global markets, you see a substantial drop in the price of natural gas in the U.S. And it's curious because we have a lot of cheap shale gas in the United States, but there is also a lot and shale gas is not that cheap. It's moderately priced gas. There is a lot of very, very inexpensive conventional gas out in the world. And so if you have global markets, that gas would be developed and prices would go down, not just for us, but for everyone. These are, as you all have seen these before, the global gas shale opportunities. The communique from Brussels encourages countries who wish to exercise that option to develop their indigenous shale resources. We know there's a lot of controversy on that about that in Europe. Nevertheless, you all have substantial shale resources in Europe. Ukraine has one of the largest shale basins in Europe. It would be helpful for them if they actually developed their shale resources. This is the Levant Basin, another option and source of supply for Europe. 1.6 billion barrels of oil, 122 trillion TCF of gas. This is from the USGS survey. I understand, and everyone understands, the geopolitical difficulties of developing this gas and how difficult it is to monetize, but it is, both the gas and oil do present a significant opportunity in the Eastern Mediterranean and for the Mediterranean Ring, quite frankly, which I'm going to say a little bit more about in a minute, for diversifying sources of supply. And this is, I was to say something about the Mediterranean Ring. I wanted to say a little bit here about the inequities in energy, in electricity consumption in the Mediterranean Ring. You see the northern Mediterranean there, the southern Mediterranean Ring. That is, they have 3.8 times greater per capita consumption of electricity than in the south. You can see Turkey on there, and then on the far right, very, very low per capita consumption, Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria. This is important for many, many reasons. Stability in the region, and as most people know, electricity consumption is directly correlated to the UN's Human Development Index. And as you increase your electricity consumption, you move up on that index. So there's a lot of inequity here. These inequities could be resolved by the development of the indigenous gas resources in the Mediterranean. There's enormous shale gas resources in Tunisia or Algeria and Libya, some of the largest in the world, and they look to be the best quality, and so that should be an area of focus. And also, these are select sources of generation in the Mediterranean Ring. A lot of coal, a lot of oil. The oil is especially expensive, and the coal causes climate change, exacerbates climate change much more so than natural gas. If you develop that natural gas in the region, you could reduce costs of generation in these countries and mitigate climate change. This moving on to climate change, you can look at the Mediterranean region there, and this is precipitation, changes in precipitation by percentage in the 21st century. Turkey looks really dark there. It's 40% down in precipitation. A lot of the Mediterranean region, 20%, 10% less precipitation. This has a lot of implications, particularly for a country like Turkey that relies on a lot of hydro, and other countries that rely on hydro. This will have major impacts on power generation. And for that purpose, I wanted to show you life cycle water consumption for electricity production. These are U.S. numbers. You all do a little better with water consumption in Europe. I don't know why. I haven't looked into that. But from the far left, you can see a deep shale natural gas combined cycle. This is gallons of H2O per megawatt hour, 232 for NGCCs. You go over to coal steam turbines, 620, nuclear, 704, and concentrating solar, 750. So if you're concerned about decline in precipitation and water, you need to be cognizant as you're developing your generation as well. This is, my previous speaker also alluded to efficiency. This is kind of a midterm competitiveness and climate change option we should be looking at here. This is energy intensity. And intensity is, in this instance, is a U.S. dollar. It's tons of energy per 1,000 U.S. dollars. Okay, I've rounded the energy intensity number, so this is a ratio. The OECD average is 0.09, and the U.S. and Turkey are pretty close to that, not far. But then you go over to the far left and you look at Ukraine, and it is 0.8. And Eastern European countries have very high levels of energy intensity. Those correlate very closely with countries that are heavily reliant on Russian gas. So another strategy for reducing their dependence and reliance on Russian gas and an energy security strategy is to reduce that energy intensity, particularly in those economies. And it increases your competitiveness as well. This is energy innovation, and I mentioned the indigenous shale resources here and in Africa. This is the U.S. experience in R&D experience in developing shale gas. Federal funding starting in 1978. We had an organization called GRI that received a funding through a FERC, a federal agency surcharge that they put on gas volumes. There was a time-limited tax credit, and then you can see over here, nothing. It's not moving. Oh, there we go. This is gas produced under the tax credit. This is gas produced after the tax credit. This is a couple years old. The gas produced after that tax credit is up through the ceiling at this point in time, that shale gas. The point is that this took 30 years. It was not serendipitous. You all want to produce shale basins here and around the world. It doesn't happen overnight. All the shale basins are different. And we had a much more mature market and physical infrastructure as well to support this. And so it's important to do this. It's not going to happen overnight. And one of the things that the G7 said is that we are prepared to go out and provide a lot of technical assistance from our government and from industry that we work with as well. And then finally, I just wanted to say a little bit. This is competitiveness as well. This is what has happened to the U.S. because of unconventional gas development. Contributions to GDP 2015 are expected to be $197 billion. By 2035, $332 billion contribution to GDP from unconventional gas alone. Contribution to government revenues, $49 billion to $85 billion. That's on royalties paid for gas produced on federal lands. And then finally, contributions to industry. Last year, this was an $85 billion figure. Estimates are now up to $150 billion figure. New investment in energy-intensive industries in the United States. This is why these industries don't want us to be exporting LNG. It's a balance. We're working on it. It's a tough one. And then I would close in saying that energy security is at the center of the collective agenda with our allies and partners. We fully appreciate the incredibly strategic role that Turkey will play in all of this. We look forward to its presidency of the G20 next year and working on a lot of these issues with Turkey and the G20 and on a bilateral basis as well. And I would just end by, it's always good for a political appointee, it's always safe to end a speech by a political appointee with a quote from the president, which is, because of the strength of our alliance and the endurance of our friendship, both America and Turkey are stronger and the world is more secure. And that was the president in 2009. Thank you very much. Thank you.